Faster than a speeding bullet.
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
More powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus. Resilient. Highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Better Humanology Podcast. Jared Moon here from Into 3 Fitness, and I'm super pumped to announce today's guest, Kelly Starrett. Now he needs very little introduction. You may know him from his best-selling book, Becoming a Supple Leopard, and then also his more recent book, Desk Bound. Now, a funny thing about his book, Desk Bound, when I picked the release date for my book, The Garage Gym Athlete, it's almost like you just arbitrary, throw it up there, and you don't really know who else is going to be releasing a book or when. But the reason that matters is because if you want to go into any sort of best-selling category and be number one in that category, you have to beat the people around you. Well, when I released my book last year, The Garage Gym Athlete, Kelly Starrett just so happened to release his book, Desk Bound, on the exact same day. And we traded off on Amazon number 1 and 2. We kept trading back and forth for like a week until he eventually just destroyed me because Kelly Starrett has a major following around what he's been doing with mobility, but it goes way, way beyond that, guys. I didn't want to just talk to Kelly and kind of put him in this hole of the mobility guy because I've been following his stuff for a long time, and I know that he goes a lot deeper than that. He's a lot more complex, and he's very, very intelligent. So we talk about things like the art of breathing. We talk about how to get your kids to eat more vegetables and to be healthier in the long run. We talk about being sedentary. We talk about standing. We talk about stand-up desks. And we really talk about the impact that we want to have on this world, me and him both, in building human beings and whether or not we're even actually making a dent. So don't miss this episode. Here's Kelly Starrett. All right, Kelly, welcome to the Better Humanology Podcast, man. I'm super pumped to have you on today.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, we're going to hit the ground running here with some challenges for the listeners, and I'm very interested to see what you bring to the show today. So we're going to start with a fitness or physical challenge that our listeners could do this week.
Oh, here it is. No caffeine after 4.
Okay.
And you got to be in bed for over 8 hours. You got to be in bed. So you can, I want you to get at least 8 hours of sleep. I'd like you to be in bed for 9 hours. So plan ahead. If you have to get up at 6, do the math. What time do you need to be in bed? So what we find is that a lot of people are training their brains out and doing a really good job on eat and even talking about down regulation sleep, but they're not sleeping enough. So what we want you to do is I want you to see the possibility that if the last 10 minutes before you go to bed, I mean, there's just a lot of dicking around happening at the house, right? You're watching the Netflix, Game of Thrones recap, and I think I want you to be in bed for 9 hours, but you can only have to try to sleep for 8 hours to see if you can do it.
All right, perfect, man. And then that brings me next to a mental toughness challenge.
So good. I tell you, one of the things that I think people are having a hard time with is technology. And my mental toughness challenge is see if you can sign off from your phone at 8 o'clock. And more importantly, do not bring your phone into the bedroom. I think, we could go a little bit more austere on some other, sort of habits around technology, but I guarantee you your phone doesn't belong in the bedroom. So my mental toughness challenge is if you don't have an alarm clock, you need to go buy an alarm clock and get your phone out of your stinking bedroom. It doesn't belong in your bedroom.
Awesome, man. Yeah, that'll be a good challenge. Because I know a lot of people book in their days, even people I've had on the podcast with the phone is the last thing they touch before they go to sleep and the first thing they touch when they wake up in the morning. Yeah,
and we're realists. We understand. We work for ourselves. There's a lot of interesting things. I have the New York Times on my phone, but what I'm asking you to do is not have your phone in your bedroom. So see if you can do it, because what we want, we're spending a lot of time talking about these 1% details. But it turns out it's not the 1% details that make the big difference. It's the sleep. The sleep.
Awesome, man. So I just want to get your opinion on that, on the sleep. So there's the rise and grind mentality, right? Like you could sleep when you're dead.
Because you'll be dead.
Because you'll be dead. And then there's the sleep, get the ample amount of rest, but not getting after it as hard as you could. What's your take on that? I know sleep obviously you find very important. I just want to know kind of your thoughts on the grinding versus sleep, getting enough sleep.
Well, there's a time where you're going to be forced to grind. And I think if you are really precious about always, it's get this much sleep or I'm a failure, I think that sets people up for the wrong expectation. What we say is, hey, look, there are a lot of times where you could be getting a lot more sleep, especially if you're wanting to train hard. If you're just walking around, I get it. You can probably get by on less. But that's not what's happening, especially in our sort of more training centric communities. People are training really hard these days. What we say to our best athletes is let's control the quality of the sleep you're getting. So we can shift the focus on always pure volume to, how do we get denser sleep? And, not having any caffeine after 4 o'clock sets you up for a better, denser sleep quality. Making sure you're sleeping in a pitch black room, making that there's no phone in the room, right? You drop your core temperature, earplugs, eye mask. Those are cues that help you homogenize your sleep experience. We really want people we say, hey, look, we don't want you to foam roll at the gym. We don't want you to do any soft tissue work at the gym. We want you to do it before you go to bed. The last 10 minutes before you go to the bedroom. See what I did there? The idea here is there's nothing productive happening in your world in those 10 minutes before you go to the bedroom. So that's when we want you to do your soft tissue work. And the reason we like that then is we know you've got the time and bandwidth for it, and it also will set you up to sleep denser because all of that soft tissue work has a pretty significant parasympathetic input. So, when we talk to the military, we talk to, people who are traveling, road warriors, we never preach. Everyone knows you need to sleep more. And we find that sort of being lectured to doesn't beget better sleep. Instead, what we have this badge of honor. So if you're gonna grind at 4:30, and that's when you get up, Jocko Willink style, you got to go to bed at 9, so you get your 7.5, and that's okay. So just be in bed, go to bed at 9, be in bed at 8:45, which is totally reasonable. So, but I think what we do is we cannot. One of our good friends, Alan Lim, who is a super badass exercise physiologist for the elite cyclists, founder of Scratch Labs. He's like, look, you can't cheat your physiology. So at some point, when your testosterone's in the hole, when your cortisol's through the roof, when your insulin sensitivity is trashed, and we start looking at fractionating your cholesterol, you can't lie to us. We know eventually that those sins are going to show up. And one of the things that we see is that because the environment has changed around us, because we have so many opportunities for entertainment and connection in the evening, we're just not wired for that. And it's really disrupting and starting to eat into our sleep. And it shows up eventually. When it shows up when you're 50, shows up when you're 60, shows up when your tissues start to fall apart a little prematurely. So, don't take our word for it. Try it for a week and let us know what happens. And what you'll find is that you just kicked ass. A lot of people we're seeing are really caught on the stimulant depressant cycle. They have to have 4 cups of bulletproof coffee in the morning. And then, they have to have a glass of wine to come down, or a drink, or THC, or, Ambien, people are really, I think, struggling to self-medicate to wake up and to sleep. And we've got to get a little bit more sensitized to that. Hey, you should be exhausted at the end of the night. And then, if it takes you longer than 5 minutes to fall asleep, you've got a problem.
Awesome, man. All right, I appreciate that. Now we're going to hop to the last challenge for the listeners, or really it's a recommendation. What book would you recommend everyone read right now?
There's a new book out by an author named Harari called Homo Deau, D-E-A-U, maybe. It's like Homo Sapiens. It's the follow-up to his wonderful book called Sapiens, which is a short history of Homo sapiens. And I think sometimes it's easy for us to forget the environment in which we grew up, looking at the last 2.5 million years, even the last 10,000 years, and say, why do certain behaviors exist? Why does certain physiology exist the way it has? And it's sort of these 2 books in particular are great frameworks on why we do or why we need to do the things we do. Why do we need to move more during the day? It's not just science. It's just like, well, this is the condition in which the physiology of the human being evolved. And it doesn't romanticize, Paleolithic man at all, but it says that, hey, look, the physiology is designed to do more movement. And if you're not moving, then it's sort of an error against, It's compensation. You're going to see compensation in the system. And then his second book, Homo Do, is right now. Homo number 2 is really a kind of a predicting where we're going to go and the implications of less sleep and society. It's very interesting. The 2 really interesting books about framing the long game. And I think that's what we've got to do a better job of, is helping people play this long game. In his book, and he talks about the fact in this most recent book that a lot of us have solved. For most people, we have solved issues of hunger, we've solved issues of plague, we've solved issues of war. And I'm not saying, of course, all those things are happening and people are suffering, but a lot of times those are political decisions, not technical solutions. We could get food to Syria, right? But what's interesting now is that we have sort of wrapped our heads around sort of this next set of technical challenges, being happy, and what we see is that people are living their lives in a way that they're sort of short-circuiting their brains around Instagram. I mean, if you drop into someone's Instagram feed, I mean, everyone has a six-pack and is tan on bikini on the beach and can snatch 300. And I'm like, well, I'm not pretty. I'm not popular. It's hard. It just does a lot of distortion of the brain. And secondarily, I think, there are really interesting implications around the fact that we're all going to be 100 years old, because the lifespan of the human being is 80 to 100, and most of us are not dying catastrophically of some terrible disease now. Leonardo was 88 years old, right? So we've been living, So I think what's interesting about these books is that it's going to ask us to take a much more holistic, sustainable view of some of our best practices. Why do we sleep? Why do we need to be in healthy relationships? Why do we need to downregulate? Because the physiology is really good at buffering those adaptation errors. Like, I can sneak a cigarette and drink a little bit and, not sleep for a few days, and I still kick ass because I'm a human being. But that we know is a sustainable solution. And if you're going to be 60, 70, 80, 90, 110 years old, which I think we're going to be, we need to be playing that game now. So we're playing to win the short game and simultaneously making decisions about things like eating more vegetables that sets us up for sustainability when we're 90. And that really does change the sort of the calculus of the game, because we see a lot of people engage in behaviors that are short-term wins but aren't for the long game.
And that's what I've always liked a lot about just following you over the years is you have Mobility WOD, and you're definitely known for that stuff, but you're very much whole person concept, from eating your vegetables to sleeping to breathing, through, everything, making sure that's all, each person is really well rounded. And I want to get your take on something, having just discussed what you were talking about, kind of that whole person concept. You've been in the game for a long time. Putting out information, and this renaissance, you could call it, has really formed over the last, decade, maybe longer. I've probably only been in the game, putting out content and helping people for about a decade. So that's what it seems like to me, but definitely could be longer. Do you feel like the information you're putting out, other people in the same field are putting out, do you think that we are moving in the right direction? Because I feel like you have a pretty broad view, and I think the information is good. But I'm really asking, do you think we're making a dent? Do you think that we're helping? Have you seen a shift?
Well, that's a good question. And I think the first question is, well, let's say that human performance, let's put our field in the human performance field. Let's say that's not fitnessing, right? It's not like I crushed myself at Barry's boot camp. I went to Soul Cycle and I bled through my eyes, so I'm healthy. Right? I went to CrossFit and did all the thrusters. Let's say, we take this 30,000 foot view first. And I think it's important that we recognize that maybe childhood obesity hasn't changed, that there are more obese Americans than non-obese Americans. Women's ACL injuries is still occurring at 8 to 10 times the rate of men at ACL injuries. We're seeing sort of low back pain is unchecked. There are a whole bunch of problems that I think if we take a 30,000 foot view, maybe we're not doing a great job on. I think we've made things, we've made things very sophisticated for people, and we haven't yet done a good job of transferring what we know are really good practices out of human performance. And if you read E.O. Wilson's book Consilience, which I highly recommend, I think he points out that one of the highest sort of goals and aims of science is to impact the humanities. And sometimes, we have to start somewhere and we have to lead. But, CrossFit's documentary, most recent documentary, Fitness on Earth, is on Netflix. And my mother-in-law just pulled up and she's like, we know that you and Juliet owned a CrossFit for a long time. And, but we just watched that movie last night, and it was really compelling. How hard they trained and how and it was we were really surprised at this CrossFit documentary on Netflix. And I just think what we know is that there are very few inflection points that you can see at the moment. You have to see them in trends, right? So what I'll tell you is that I think there absolutely has been a tide change around people needing to take better control of their lives. So what we're seeing is that people are becoming more realizing that the loci of control of their health is on them. That's why you'll see P90X and Insanity sell 1 million copies, because people are like, hey, it's not working. What I'm doing is not working. My body doesn't look the way it is. I don't feel good. I'm on all these medicines. How many paleo magazines, why is gluten-free a thing? Because people, I think, intuitively know that maybe what they're doing is not working or they could work better. So we have it on the one hand. So we always assume that people know that what they need to do. And then now it's about removing the barriers to adherence. So if you're, a 9-year-old girl at an elementary school, you don't have any agency, as much agency, until we begin to take now systematic reforms, taking these principles in, getting kids moving more, watching less TV, eating vegetables, you can see that it's going to take all of us working at different angles to start to see a massive tide change. So I think there's been a consciousness change. But simultaneously, there's been a lot of changes in the environment. The average adult is on their smartphones for 2.5 hours a day. And think about what posture that is in, and think about the implications on your breathing and your pelvic floor in those compromised positions. So, it's not that we can't handle the tech, but we need to think differently about what the rest of our lives look like. And sort of, if you want people to address diabetes, and eat better, not that that's, just obviously type 1, type 2 diabetes are different, but you can't go into a urban center and ask people to eat vegetables when they can't buy vegetables. You can't ask kids to move around more if they're not allowed to go to recess and move around more and there's no resources for that. So at some point we're going to have the shift, and certainly our current president, who doesn't believe in exercise, that's not great for us, right? And I'm not even talking about politics. I'm just saying that, like, when the commander in chief is like, hey, I don't believe in exercise, we have a problem, especially when I think the bill is going to come due for us all. What I do know is that the way human beings are wired, my wife and I are very much Republicans in this way. And I mean Republican as in local community Republican. We're communitarianism, communitarianists. And that means that we think the community is the place to solve these things. So we need to have simultaneously probably larger investment in public community works so that we can solve our own problems in a community level. I think if you look at these fitness communities now, there are so many good gyms, the Deuce Gym. There's just so many local incredible gyms, creating communities of people who then affect their grandparents and brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles. And that's really how I think this is going to spread. If we could get squatting to be like fidget spinners, then, we're going to take over the world. But in the meantime, I think the issue is that it's going to be a little bit slower process than we'd like. And that's okay. It just takes a while. Some of us, it's probably too late for some of us, but not too late for our children. And I think, we simultaneously, again, have to be playing for the future. And that, we've got to give people a template so that it's not some heroic change. I was in a hospital working in intensive care and in cardiac rehab at the end of one of my rotations. And I sat in on a heart surgery with a guy who was probably 350 pounds. He was an attorney, wildly successful, amazing wife, 3 kids. And, the guy had 3 stents put in his heart, and could not change his behaviors. And I that always has stuck with me, because here was a person who is highly educated, affluent, and yet succumbed to stress and programming around eating. And everyone comes from somewhere. And so it's we want to be really careful about just saying, hey, bro, what the hell are you doing? Realizing that guy had learned and patterned, and our brains are wired a certain way for a certain reason. I mean, one of my podcasts I think you got to listen to besides this one is Gabby Reese and Neil Strauss have a podcast called The Truth Barrel. And we put up on our site, we put up an interview with Lustig, who is the kind of chief sugar researcher from UCSF. And his stuff is old and new, but really understanding the role of fructose on the brain and understanding that we're being programmed inadvertently. And that's okay. And you'll see that in Harari's book too, is understanding the programming. Like, I love ice cream and sugar. I love it. This is why I train, so I can eat ice cream. Yet I know I shouldn't eat ice cream. And literally, if I eat ice cream one day, the next time at the exact same moment, I'm like, hey, ice cream. My brain is wired that way. So, I have to say that here was a human being who had everything going for him, and yet still went down this path where he could not avoid these interventions. And now we have more information about our genetics and about behavior. And I guarantee you that guy was a stress case. And I guarantee you that, it wasn't about access to food. It was about sleep and stress and stress eating and programming and alcohol. And I think we either need to make sure that we're either all okay with it and like, this is who we are, we're Wall-E, and let's just embrace that and without judgment, right? Or we're going to have a come to Jesus moment about what it means to be a human being and what kind of quality of life do we expect for ourselves. Because I think that's really the issue. I think it's about lost potential. So, I think it's easy to be a negatron, but also, as you can see, when we started this thing, there were 21 CrossFits and no small private training studios. And now 15,000 CrossFits and how many private training studios, and you can buy Olympic lifting shoes, at Target. Something has changed. You can buy kettlebells everywhere. When we started our gym 12 years ago, you couldn't buy kettlebells really. You just you couldn't buy them. There was no, they were expensive. And we drove to Santa Cruz to a weird secondhand surf shop, and they imported kettlebells, these cheap Chinese kettlebells. So we would, save up our money and then drive down there every couple months and buy one or two new kettlebells. And now literally you can get a kettlebell at, Big Five, Right. It's amazing. So the world has changed. And, Biggest Loser obviously is successful for a reason, because I think people see themselves in this. And what they see is that, hey, what I'm doing currently isn't working. I don't feel good. And I think we just have to keep pushing positive and make it so that these behaviors are really sustainable. And that's why we say things like, hey, let's focus on sleep density first, then we'll talk about sleep volume,
I think what you point out about equipment and whatnot is funny is I put a lot of DIY projects for Garage Gym athletes on my site. One of the first ones I ever did was PVC rings, like way back in the day. And now I get comments on that article because it's still up, and people are like, "You're an idiot. You could buy these for like $20 at Walmart or something." I'm like, you couldn't. Like, everyone was making them out of PVC, put them in their oven, and like all sorts of stuff, making these it was hard to get a pair of rings. So yeah, I think definitely the market has shifted in the right direction.
Dude, I love it. When we opened our gym, we couldn't afford all those racks. They were like mega racks, and we weld our own racks, we weld our own pull-up bar, we made our own prowlers. I couldn't afford these $80 Splieth rings. They were $180. They're so expensive. So I found commercial fishing net rings, and on the internet, and literally, I bought my first pair of Olympic lifting shoes out of the back of some guy's car. Right? These people that just don't realize, and they're right. You're like, you're an idiot. And you're like, we did an article about how to make our own wrist wraps because you couldn't just buy wrist wraps,
right.
Yeah, I just think people have forgotten that the world looked very, very different.
That's awesome, man. So how long I know you have a garage gym. How long have you been doing the garage gym thing?
I've been doing the garage gym in earnest for 15 years, probably. I remember my wife was early attorney, and we were super broke. I was a grad student, she was an attorney, and we got an allowance, and like that was our like big budget. Like we got and it was a lot at the time. It was like $300 a month for
Nice.
whatever I want, right? And I could blow it on all the coffee, all the whatever I wanted. And I saved a couple months, like really skimped. And I went on to Craigslist and bought a whole bunch of barbells and plates from someone whose son had gone to college. And I still have these bumpers. They're York bumpers, steel bumpers with like 2 inches of rubber on those. So they're 55 pounds. And that was the first pair of bumpers I owned. And she's like, "You're crazy. You're never going to use this stuff." And I was like, whatever. I'm drilling up my own pull-up rack, and I got to train at home. And that was really the start of my home gym. I just had janky equipment, and some of that stuff is still around. It's crazy how it's still going strong. And that was when I realized that everyone should have a home gym. We belonged to we had a gym membership at like Club One, some fancy gym, because we would commute over. Juliet was a lawyer in Oakland, and then I was in grad school, so we'd go train at like 5 in the morning and then go on with our day. But then I also trained at home, and I was doing Olympic lifting, hang power cleans, because I couldn't drop. You know what I mean?
You're right. That's awesome, man. And I kind of want to blend the two topics, because you're talking about, making a change these days is probably going to have to start at the community level inside of our communities. And then also, having a garage gym yourself. But I think it brings it down to being a leader inside of your family, which I know that you are. How do you treat that, all of this information like fitness, health, nutrition, all of that with your children?
Everyone who's a coach as a kid struggles with saying, "Hey, how do I make it so that my kids aren't aliens, right? And have weird food issues."
Right.
I have 2 daughters, and what we do is we keep putting good food in their way. If you want your kids to eat salad, eat a lot of salad, put salad on their plates every night, and in 10 years they'll eat salad. I mean, it's that simple. It really is that simple.
Yeah, there's a quote that I heard recently. It was around Father's Day, and it was, my father never taught me how to live. He just lived and allowed me to watch him do it. Something along those lines.
So one of the things that we know is that we're trying to limit total sedentary behaviors in the day to 4 hours. For kids, we're trying to get, the research is that it's 2 hours of sitting or sedentary behaviors. And most of us are sitting like 8 to 10 hours. And we're just, by the time we had commute and chair and sitting at the table, we're engaged in a lot of behavior that doesn't let the physiology of the human being function as well as it could. And one of the things that we recommend for these sit-to-stand desks is we're like, hey, move your desk up high, then unplug it, right? So that you don't have to make a choice. When you come back from lunch, you're automatically in a good position, and it's one less choice you have to make. So, I think as long as we're savvy to the fact that we're programmable to save energy, we're programmable to engage in habit, then we can program that so that it's a lot easier for me. If I need a healthy snack and there happen to be almonds and apples on my desk, I'm going to eat almonds and apples, right? If there's, crap on my desk, I'm going to eat crap. I mean, it's just, I want to take out as many of these choices, because by the end of the day, we know is decision fatigue is a real thing.
Yeah. And that's, to be honest, to go back to your standing point, when I switched to a standing desk a few years ago, I mean, train all the time, pretty fit dude, that was still a very hard transition at first. And it's partly like just what you've been conditioned for. You're always like, oh man, I could sit down now, or like you're just looking for that chair, and it's not quite a comfortable place to be in. But you really, once you train yourself and you kind of get past that, I don't know, probably only lasted like a week or two, you have conditioned yourself to new habits and behavior.
Well, that's right. That's really it. It takes a little while, and also, it's a physical behavior. I mean, did you nail your ass to grass squat in the first week? Probably not. So, did you run a marathon and after 3 days of your new jogging routine? Probably not. So, it's okay for it to take time, and it's okay to put skill in. And this comes back to this conversation we started with about playing the long game. It's really difficult for us to sort of envision ourselves in the long haul when some of the behaviors that we engage in, fall into this complexity continuum. There's no more complex system than the human being. And, currently in physical therapy, we're arguing about, are we, just slave to our genetics and biomechanics, or is it more like, this biopsychosocial model that that all these other inputs matter. Well, it's difficult for us to see sometimes the complexity within the system, that certain behaviors beget certain other behaviors that are coupled in sort of ways that are hidden to us. And a good example of this is, when I sometimes do a poor job on my fasting, I fast and then I'm undercaloried by the time I train, and then I get full fast and I'm busy, and then I eat dinner with my kids at 6:30, and then guess what? I am really undercaloried for being 228 pounds and training hard. And, I end up waking up 6 hours later than my last meal, starving, and I eat. And then I should not be eating a meal at 11 o'clock at night, And so that's one of those examples of behaviors, that when I'm eating chicken and salad or chicken and toast or whatever it is I want to eat at 11 o'clock at night, that is a decision that I made because I decided, I wasn't thinking about how I could eat and when I could eat. Does that make sense? And so earlier behaviors in the day beget later behaviors in the day. I'm tired because I didn't sleep well. I drink a bunch of caffeine, need a caffeine bump at 4 o'clock to stay awake and get to the end of the day. And lo and behold, that caffeine bump at 4 o'clock interrupts the quality of my sleep later on. Ergo, I wake up and I'm tired.
Yeah, add a glass of wine to make sure that you fall asleep to the end of that.
That's right. Well, and I think that's what's really nice, is that it's okay to say, let's be transparent. And I really appreciate that people are trying to do the right thing. They're like, I am a stress case. I need to come down. There was a woman in our neighborhood who had a real lot of anxiety around her kids and, in her life and her stress job. And she was drinking, a bottle to a bottle and a half of wine a night. And that was just, she realized ultimately, because we recommended, she asked us some training advice, some diet advice, finally, and we don't, throw it out there, but she came to us and we were like, hey, the easiest thing we could do is talk about, one of the reasons we noticed that you drink a lot of wine, and can you talk about that? And she was like, well, I'm really stressed. And we're like, well, what other ways can we help you manage your stress? So she started doing some breathing, and she started talking, and lo and behold, she was a lot less anxious. And she was like, I didn't even want the wine at night. And we were like, there you go. And it's okay for it to be complex. It's okay for the complexity of the human to exist. And it's okay for these skills to take a long time to set because they're skills. It's okay. It's not the quick fix. I wish I could just take turmeric and call it good, but it's not.
Yeah, that's what the world will have you believe. It's every action you're doing today is an investment for the future, right?
Yeah, but it's also hard to keep that in because, like I said, I think we're wired differently. We're wired, man, Game of Thrones is on. It was on at 9 o'clock. It means that I didn't, we had friends over at the house. I'm not in bed till 10:30. That just throws me off. The next day I'm a little bit draggy, and that's because we're modern humans, and there are a lot of things pulling on our attention more than ever before.
All right, man, I'm going to shift gears on you here. I want to ask you a question we ask guests from time to time, and it kind of gives me a bigger picture of, the impact you want to make. So say there's a nationwide curriculum implemented, and the president calls you up and he says you're responsible for a chapter of this book that they're putting out across all schools nationwide. And so every single child in America will have to read your chapter, be tested on, and pass before they can graduate high school. What would you write your chapter about?
Physical literacy.
All right. Elaborate on that a little bit more.
There are fundamental positions and shapes that you need to be able to get in as a human being. Picking something up off the ground, squatting yourself down to the toilet, I think that there are some fundamental skills that we should have as a human that literally make us human. Everyone should be able to run. I don't care if you can run fast or far, but everyone should be able to run well. And I think we're not looking at human movement as a taught skill. We kind of just say the same thing we said to kids. You broke your arm as a little kid. They're like, you'll be fine. Just be a little kid again. And I think what we're seeing now is that kids are not growing up in an environment that begets and normalizes human physiology. And so what we're seeing is real errors and holes, in the physical lexicon of kids. Kids, can't jump on a single foot. Kids can't skip. Just today, Zach Avanesh, who's an old friend, put up, this like 10 reasons why, we should have physical, strength conditioning in schools. And he's like, because number one was like, it's like, I just taught 5, high schoolers how to skip. I mean, like, what do you don't know how to skip? Like, what are you talking about? And what we are saying is that kids just aren't involved in the environment. And that's our fault. That's not their fault. We have to do a better job of creating, foundational positions and mechanics. Even if it's just hanging on a bar, you should be able to cross the monkey bars. You should be able to, do a push-up, do a pull-up, or at least get into those shapes, because a lot of kids can't even get these shapes.
And so, and I think you hit on some of the points from your book, Desk Bound, which is a phenomenal book, by the way. And you're talking about in that book, people, they might not need to be able to be an elite athlete, but they still have to pick up their groceries, right? They have to be able to hinge at the hip.
That's right, and that's old school. I mean, who has said that? Greg Glassman, Louis Simmons. I mean, like every single person on the planet. We can turn those, dial those needs up and down. But if you can't squat down with your heels on the ground, you're not existing. Yes, you can go up and down, but you're not doing it in the way that the body is optimally designed. And when and if you fall, or when and if you end up with an Achilles problem or knee problem, you have to recognize those movement deficiencies as a component to a lot of the musculoskeletal problems we see. If you're missing your hip range of motion and you have low back pain, it's difficult for the science to say that those things are somehow related, but it's a simple mechanical system, and logic dictates that if you have the handbrakes on your Ferrari on, then the wheels are going to get hot because the brakes are rubbing. Does that make sense?
That does. And I want to pick your brain a little bit more about breathing and breathing practices. Maybe what are you doing yourself personally, just out of my own curiosity, and then how do you feel like that plays a role in movement?
Well, I think people have been talking about breathing for as long as there have been people, and look at all the interesting free diving and apnea. Pranayama is as old as it gets. I think. I was in plenty of yoga classes for a long time, but I didn't really realize how much more I could get out of my function until I started focusing on breathing mechanics, breathing efficiency, right? Being able to move large amounts of air in and out, air down, and forget just the physiology. What I'll tell you is that, I was interested in this thing for a long time because I had terrible asthma in high school, really bad. In fact, when I was on the national team, I had to register my inhaler with the International Olympic Committee. I mean, I was living on that inhaler, 15 puffs a day, 20 puffs a day, just to get through the workouts. It was brutal. And that's a lot of albuterol, by the way. No one should be taking that much albuterol. And it's one of the reasons I love coffee, because it turns out that, the caffeine is like a xanthine, which is like the theophylline. It's a bronchodilator, like in albuterol. And, but needless to say, it was Brian McKenzie who now has a really wonderful course called The Art of Breath through Power, Speed, Endurance, and a lot of really good breathing strategies. And he's with a former one of our staff members, Rob Wilson, doing this. And Brian was hanging out with Laird Hamilton, and Laird had been using and adopting some of the techniques from Wim Hof early on, and then started putting them into the pool, which was an environment that forced breathing mechanics. You had to breathe correctly, otherwise you couldn't complete the task. You had to be efficient in your exhales. You had to, swimming the dumbbells across the pool builds CO2 tolerance better than anything else I've seen. And what I think is someone like Wim Hof has done an amazing job of really bringing to our attention that we could directly impart our physiologies in a way that wasn't sort of shrouded or enshrined in the yogic movement, which, for better same or worse, I think sometimes that just the baggage of that turns people off, and it's just, but Iyengar a long time ago said the nerve is the king of the breath and the breath is the king of the brain. And I think we sometimes fail as modern people, because clearly there have been people talking about this for a long time. We just didn't realize how important it was the impact we could have on the nervous system and the physiology and the output of the human being when we focused on breathing efficiency, breathing mechanics. And, it is interesting when we view the spine as not just the repository for the nervous system, and not just, and I say spine, I'm talking about head to butt, not just the primary chassis for the engines of the hip and shoulder, but also as the housing for the mechanical ventilation system, the diaphragm, the trunk musculature, the rib cage. And what we see is that there's a lot of sort of potential there, untrained, untapped potential around not having mechanical breathing be a limiter on your performance, and ways that we can directly impact nervous system so that we can mobilize more efficiently, so we can downregulate, so we can upregulate. It's been really remarkable to take some of these very, very old lessons and sort of repurpose them and tweak them in our modern sensibilities, reapply them to areas that they haven't necessarily been applied before. And that's been transformational. So my breathing practice happens every time I'm on the bike or breathing hard. I'm aware of it. I also do a lot of practice in the pool, and I do a lot of sort of breathing drills on my own, working on CO2 tolerance, et cetera, et cetera. So again, if look at what XPT Life is doing, that's Laird and Gabby's wonderful program. Look at Art of Breath, what Brian McKenzie is doing. And I think you can begin to apply these things to your training, because that's the lens through which we view it. I think people like PRI, the Postural Restoration Institute, has been talking about breathing mechanics for a long time, but sometimes their stuff gets lost because it's hard to see how that impacts my deadlifting, right? So when we can, repurpose and reprogram and explain and apply to the problems that we're trying to solve, I think we can do a lot better.
Yeah, I know personally that was a problem I ran into for many years, was being too tactical in nature of like what you just said, like, okay, great, but how is that going to help me do X? And you got to realize they all connect together.
Yeah, well, and also there's a phenomenon in complexity theory, and if it sounds like I spend a lot of time reading there, it's because I do. There's a book by Arbisman, and the book is called Complicated, and in that book, he talks about a software phenomenon called a klug or a kluge, K-L-U-G-E. And a kluge is it's a piece of software that's old and outdated, but new software gets mated on top of it, right? So you have these integrated systems where you have big modern systems, and for a gym owner out there listening, this is like mind body online. So you start, we need a gym management system. You jump into mind body, and then all of a sudden you realize that you can't schedule with mind body. So you have you plug in for that, and then selling things is difficult. So you have Shopify, and then all of a sudden, you realize that you've been running this business and your database is huge, and to pull out mind body online is going to cause you lots of pain and lots of money. And so you just keep strapping on these inelegant software systems on top of an old system to try to make the old system work. Or the old system is sort of the old mechanical heart of the new hotness. And we see this phenomenon happen all the time around, really complicated software. For example, remember the Y2K time thing? We thought all the computers were going to shut down. All that was going on, right? Because when they built the original software, they didn't think of it going up to the year 2000. And we can apply that same level of thinking to sort of the way we train people, that we don't have a cogent, robust, underpinning model about integrating movement and breathing and mechanics. What we do is we go learn something and then try to apply it to the old system. Because the old system isn't like perfect software, it's not Java, it doesn't allow us to do what we want to do. It's Fortran. And what we need to do is, kind of reconceptualize what the base model is. And I think sometimes around breathing, it's difficult for us to integrate, because now I'm like, okay, now I've just added more complexity because now I have to do yoga twice a week. And that's a completely separate breathing practice But meanwhile, I've got 3 1-hour sessions. That's all I can work in. So what's going to drop? What's going to go? For example, when I talk about breathing, I run a basically skilled conditioning class at our gym a couple days a week. I just had 20 people in our class before I talked to you. And, some of the breathing stuff I work in early on as we're warming up with jump roping. We're breathing through our nose only. Then we'll do breath holds and jump roping. Then so there's a lot of ways for me to integrate these practices into my other practice already so that I can be doing 2 or 3 things at once instead of adding yet another thing I'm supposed to do with my life. Because what we want to do is continue to simplify people's life experience. So you have things like time to free associate and daydream and dick around and, that's what we need to do. And instead it feels like, you're just going from one should to the next.
I love the concept and the whole idea of that entire thing. But I want to be mindful of your time, and I got to get the question of the show in. Are you ready for it?
Oh boy. Yeah, yes. These are my real calves. Is that what you're going to ask?
That's exactly what I was going to ask. No. So since it's the Better Humanology podcast, one question for you. Every guest gets it. What is your best advice you have for becoming a better human? And it's 100% open-ended.
What I will tell you is the area that I needed to focus on the most was these things called feelings. And when I'm more in touch with my feelings, right, then it turns out I do a lot better. And that works on a lot of different ways. I was taught early on to be stoic and suck it up. We didn't tell our coaches what was going on because they didn't ask. And, we just suffered in silence, and, one of the things that my wife and I do every week is we have something called the feelings meeting where we sit down and really talk about in a real meta way, an obvious way, overt way, what's going on with us, what's going on with our relation, what's going on with our kids. And sometimes it's nothing, because the feelings meeting is just a formal way to get things done and to have it touch it. I think Tony Robbins recently said in one of his posts, he was like, look, you got to daydream, that's great. You got to strategize, that's great. But until you actually schedule it, it doesn't exist. And I really appreciate that. And so my wife and I schedule this thing called the feelings meeting. And that when I am more listening to what's really going on, instead of just kind of shoving it down and charging ahead, I find that I'm able to do a lot more work and be a lot more effective. And that even translates to my own personal training, because if I am listening, it turns out that I get really clear advice about whether I should train or not. I know this even from my genetics. I have this thing called a high desire to train. And that, I wake up thinking about exercise and like, what am I going to do? And where are we going? And on those days where I now don't train. My body is very clear that I should be taking a restoration day. Go for a walk, play around in the pool, do some meditating, right? Do some yoga, but don't train those days. And before I would just keep grinding through, no problem. I got this, why? Because I'm part of the system. So, trying to be in touch with how you're feeling. This isn't a shameful plug, but, Dr. Andy Galpin and Brian McKenzie just wrote a book called Unplugged, which is really trying to get back to consciousness and intuition and really let your body, trusting that you've set yourself up to be able to interpret what your body's telling you.
I love that, man. All right. So is there anywhere that you'd like to point people, have people check out, anything I can link to in the show notes of this show?
Well, one of the things is people just don't sometimes know where to begin. On mobilitywod.com, we've been doing a daily workout for years now. And if you are interested in improving your positions and improving your tissue quality, we do a daily follow-along video on Mobility WOD, and that's WOD workout of the day. And there's a free 10-day trial. So come on board, grab a lacrosse ball, grab a band, start working on your positions and mechanics and see how you feel, and see if it doesn't improve your life.
Awesome, man. I'll link to all that. Kelly, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your time today.
My pleasure, Jared. Thanks, man.
Thanks.
best. Losers always whine about their best.